Good morning, Bob. You left that great video for me yesterday with some really interesting questions, and today I'm going to try to get back to you and try to answer them as best I can. There's two basic questions that you asked, so I'll actually address the second one first, and that is, what is a polis? Before I get started, I also want to apologize for the video and the sound quality. I'm recording this on my little old laptop, so things are going to get a little funny. If we make a habit of doing this, I'll get a nice shiny camera and run this off of my desktop, so things will run a lot more smoothly then. So what is a polis? That's not an easy question to answer. In the simplest terms, a polis is a Greek city-state. That's the best answer I can give you. That's really the best answer anyone's going to give you, because a polis wasn't a rigidly defined thing. It's not like the modern concept of a nation that's recognized by other nations and may or may not have a seat in the United Nations. That's completely formalized. Basically, a city was a polis if they decided they were a polis and no one invaded them for it. That's what made a city-state a polis. You know the specifics at least as well as I do. They emerged out of the Greek Archaic Age, supposedly, and it was basically a city or a collection of towns, usually quite geographically close, that controlled a certain territory of land. Athens being the great example, controlling Attica. And that's a polis. Historically, they lasted for quite a long time, but again, that really depends on what you mean by a polis. We usually think of the classic era, so we think of Athens, we think of Sparta in the 5th century BC, but these city-states existed before that, and they continue to exist even into the Macedonian occupation and the Hellenistic period. These cities were still largely self-governed, even though militaristically they weren't necessarily a power, a world power that they had been. So when you're approaching the idea of what is a polis, you really either have to define it rigidly or accept that you're going to get some wildly differing opinions on what what a polis is. I guess the big thing to understand, the big distinction between a polis and just a city, is that a polis was, for the most part, autonomously self-governed. So they had their own council, and at very least they had their own authority within the city and within their territory. And depending on the historical period, this may or may not include military or trade sanctions or whatnot. So that kind of brings us to the second question you asked, and this was the big one. This is the one you put on the tagline. Can we compare the Spartan Perioikoi to the Roman Socii? So, in English, Spartan had little towns and small cities around it, and they had a very special political relationship to Sparta. They had some rights, they had certain responsibilities for taxes. In return, they had a mutual defense. No one was going to invade the Perioikoi because it was going to irritate the Spartans. And so there was a symbiosis there. Probably Sparta got the better deal, but they also had the bigger army, so that's the way things worked then. And you want to compare that to Rome and the small cities and city-states. that existed in the Italian peninsula alongside Rome prior to the civil wars and the imperial period. Obviously, by then, the whole of Italy was directly under Roman control. It was essentially the province of Rome. So the question is, can we compare these? Well, you outlined some very valid points, some very good points. And to bring it up briefly, yeah, I think we can. I think we can draw direct comparisons between these because there's a very similar political structure going on around them. The Spartans had geographical, military, and economic control, and these other city-states had to exist within that. And that's pretty much exactly the same thing that evolved on the Italian peninsula with Rome and the other Italian city-states. If you want to think of it like this, it was basically the same equation, so it makes sense that you have similar solutions. Now, was it exactly the same thing? Well, probably not. And although we can make educated guesses for unknowns in each one, if there's an aspect of the Perioikoi society that we don't understand, but we do understand it about the Roman Socii, we can probably make educated guesses using that comparison, but we always have to be careful because we don't know. We can't be afraid of those unknowns. We can't be afraid to admit that this is an educated guess. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an educated guess. That's the whole point of all the education. So yeah, we'll go with that. We'll say yeah. You can make these. We can make these comparisons, but we also have to define exactly where things started to go radically different. And of course, the obvious thing is we had very different outcomes. Now, I'm not really that clear on what happened to the Perioikoi. Not that much is written about this, and you probably know better than I do. But I honestly don't know what happened to the Spartan Perioikoi after the Macedonian expansion of power, or the Hellenistic period. Presumably these cities were still there, but I don't know their direct relationship to Sparta, or if they dealt directly with Macedon. That I might have to leave to you. You always have been the more detailed historian. But we do know what happened to the Italian city-states. We know that there was the Social War, which militaristically was unclear who the winner was, but the Italian states did in fact get their way. They got Roman citizenship, effectively becoming a part of Greater Rome. And that was different. That was triggered by different circumstances. The Spartans always had someone else on the outside. The Greek city-states were constantly at war with each other, which was not dissimilar to the Italian states. But that never really changed in Greece, at least not until the Macedonians came in and took over, making all the Greek city-states equal, but still in competition. Whereas in Italy, Rome emerged as the dominant force. There was no strong foreign threat. The Carthaginians were the closest ones to come to actually invading Italy up until the Vandals and the Visigoths. So the only people that the Socii had, or so the only states the Socii had to fight against were each other and Rome. So I think that's probably what led to the different outcome. But I think there's fertile ground here for further exploration. And of course, we can start looking elsewhere for other comparisons and maybe even draw some social comparisons, which I always find a little more interesting myself. I know you like the wars. And maybe I'll get back to you later today or tomorrow on some of that. I have a couple ideas, but we'll see how that works. So I'll talk to you later, and we'll see how this video conferencing thing works. Take care.